The engines hummed steadily as Flight 297 cruised at 36,000 feet, carting across the West European sky. The sun glowed behind a thick layer of clouds, casting a golden shimmer over the horizon. Inside the cockpit, Captain Richard Hayes adjusted the flight settings while his, David Mendes, ran the routine check on their navigation instruments. Everything was smooth, a textbook flight so far. The passengers in the cabin behind them were settling in for the journey from Paris to New York, unaware that within seconds, their lives would hang in the balance. The first sign of trouble came as a soft chime from the flight computer, a minor alert. Hayes barely acknowledged it, thinking it was another minor altitude fluctuation due to wind pressure. But then a second chime followed, and then a third. Mendes frowned, glancing at the radar. His expression changed instantly. "Captain, we've got an aircraft moving fast at our altitude." Hayes stiffened. That wasn't supposed to happen. At their cruising level, all flights were strictly coordinated to prevent conflicts. He leaned forward, his experienced eyes darting over the instruments. The Traffic Collision Avoidance System, TCAS, blinked, its screen pulsing red. Traffic! Traffic! The warning filled the cockpit, sharp and urgent. Hayes immediately grabbed the yoke. "Where is it?" Mendes's voice was tight, controlled but alarmed. "It's closing in fast, bearing 090, direct collision course." The numbers didn't make sense. The approaching aircraft was moving too fast for a commercial plane. It had no transponder ID, no communications, just a silent approach at impossible speed. The system screamed again. 19 seconds to impact. Hayes felt his pulse slam against his ribs. Training kicked in. Instinct overrode fear. "Descending. Hold on." He yanked the controls. The nose of the plane dipped sharply. The engines roared in protest as the massive aircraft was forced into an emergency descent. The sudden shift in altitude sent a jolt through the cabin. Passengers gasped as drinks spilled, luggage compartments rattled. Flight attendants grabbed onto seats, bracing themselves against the force of gravity pulling them downward. Through the windshield, Hayes caught a glimpse of silver, a sleek, metallic fuselage streaking past. The unidentified aircraft cut through the sky with eerie precision, missing them by what felt like inches. The airframe of Flight 297 shuddered violently in its wake, turbulence shaking the cockpit as Hayes fought to stabilize their descent. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the mysterious aircraft was gone. Hayes pulled back on the controls, leveling the plane. Sweat beaded along his brow. He turned to Mendes, whose knuckles were white against the control panel. They both exhaled at the same time. "What the hell was that?" Mendes muttered. Hayes shook his head. His hands were still trembling from the adrenaline surge. "Did ATC warn us about any traffic?" Mendes quickly switched to the communications panel. "Paris Control, this is Flight 297. We just had a near miss with an unidentified aircraft at FL-13 Sossat. Do you copy?" "Static." Mendes adjusted the frequency. "Paris Control, please respond." A brief crackle, then a voice came through. "Flight 297, say again." "We have no recorded traffic near your position." Hayes stared at the instruments, his stomach twisting. That wasn't possible. They had seen it with their own eyes. The alarms had screamed. Yet the air traffic controllers were telling them there had been nothing there. Mendes switched to the flight log, pulling up the recorded radar history. His face peeled. "It's gone," he whispered. The system didn't register anything. Hayes clenched his jaw. He knew what he had seen. He knew what they had almost collided with. But if there was no record of it, then where had it come from? A chill settled over him as he thought about how close they had come to disaster. 19 seconds. That was all they had. Mendes scrolled through the flight log again, his fingers moving over the controls with increasing frustration. The radar history showed nothing. The transponder readings were normal. It was as if the plane they had nearly collided with had never existed. He turned to Hayes, his face still peeled from the adrenaline rush. "This doesn't make sense. That jet was real. We saw it." Hayes didn't respond immediately. His eyes were locked onto the windshield, scanning the west sky ahead as if expecting to see the rogue aircraft return. But there was nothing, just an endless stretch of clouds and sky. "Try contacting other aircraft in our vicinity," he finally said. "Maybe someone else saw it too." Mendez switched frequencies. "Any aircraft on this channel? This is Flight 297. We just had a with an unidentified plane at FL367. Anyone have a visual?" Silence. The airwaves remained empty, save for the occasional static hum of background noise. Mendez repeated the call, his voice tighter this time. "Any aircraft in the vicinity of our flight path? Do you copy?" Still nothing. Hayes checked their instruments again, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Aircraft didn't just disappear. There were always records, black box data, ATC logs, something. His grip on the yoke tightened. "Check the emergency frequencies," he ordered. "See if anyone else has picked up anything unusual." Mendez complied, switching to the emergency distress channel. At first, the frequency was clear, only the usual white noise that filled the gaps between transmissions. But then, something crackled through the silence. A faint, broken signal, fragmented and barely intelligible. "This is cockpit damaged, oxygen dropping, losing altitude, request emergency landing in San Francisco." Mendez and Hayes exchanged alarmed glances. San Francisco? They were nowhere near California. Mendez leaned into the microphone. "This is Flight 297. We hear you. What is your current position?" Static. Then the voice returned, still distorted, barely audible. "Cockpit compromised, we are not alone, losing." The transmission cut off abruptly. Mendez stared at the radio as if it had personally betrayed him. "That wasn't a normal distress call." Hayes nodded, his throat dry. "No, it wasn't." The cockpit fell into heavy silence. Mendez ran a quick search for with active flights. No matches. No such plane was currently in service. "This doesn't make sense," Mendez muttered. "If this was a real emergency, they should be broadcasting a Mayday. But they're not even listed as an active flight." Hayes exhaled slowly, his mind racing. The rogue aircraft, the near collision, the mysterious distress signal, all of it was connected. But he had no way of knowing how. He had flown thousands of hours, seen his fair share of anomalies, but this was something else. Something unnatural. Then the radio crackled again. A new voice, deeper, fragmented as if coming from a distance. "You should not be here." The cockpit lights flickered. Mendez jumped, his hands hovering over the controls. "Did you hear that?" Hayes swallowed hard. He had heard it. And somehow, deep in his gut, he knew they weren't meant to. The instruments jittered briefly, the altitude reading fluctuating before stabilizing again. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. Hayes made a decision. "We need to report this immediately," he said, switching to a direct ATC line. "Paris Control, this is Flight 297. We need to make an urgent report of an unidentified aircraft and an anomalous transmission on emergency channels." A pause. Then, "Flight 297, please clarify the nature of your report." "What unidentified aircraft?" Hayes gritted his teeth. "We had a with an aircraft that isn't logged on any system. It vanished from radar. We also received a distress signal from a flight that doesn't exist. I need confirmation that." Static. Then the line cleared. "Flight 297, we have no record of an unidentified aircraft in your vicinity. Please confirm your current status." Mendez muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "They're acting like nothing happened." Hayes felt his hands tremble slightly on the controls. Something was wrong. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The radio remained silent for a long moment before a final message came through. "Flight 297, turn back." The voice was distorted, layered, as if multiple people had spoken at once. The control tower at San Francisco International Airport hummed with routine activity. Air traffic controllers monitored flight paths, coordinated landings, and kept a watchful eye on the steady flow of aircraft coming in from across the world. The radar screen glowed in the dim room, dotted with the usual blips of scheduled flights approaching the Bay Area. It was business as usual until it wasn't. A sudden alert flashed across the screen. An unscheduled aircraft was approaching fast. One of the controllers frowned, adjusting his headset as he scanned the data. There was no filed flight plan, no transponder ID. Just a single object cutting through the airspace at an alarming speed. Unscheduled inbound, the operator muttered. His supervisor leaned in, studying the screen with narrowed eyes. What the hell? There's no record of this flight. Try contacting them, the supervisor ordered. The operator opened the channel. Unidentified aircraft, this is San Francisco International Airport. You are entering restricted airspace without clearance. Identify yourself immediately. Static. Then a broken voice crackled through the speakers. Cockpit damaged, emergency landing. The operator exchanged a puzzled look with his supervisor. That call sign didn't match any known flights. He typed it into the system, searching for a record. Nothing. It simply did not exist. Unidentified aircraft, repeat your message, the operator said, trying to steady his voice. More static. Then. We are not alone, losing. The transmission cut off abruptly. The entire room fell silent. Controllers stared at each other, their faces tight with confusion and unease. The radar continued tracking the unidentified aircraft, closing in fast, just minutes from the city. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the blip on the radar vanished. The operator's hands hovered over the controls. Where did it go? He ran a diagnostic, checking for system malfunctions, but everything was functioning normally. The plane had simply disappeared. His supervisor's face was pale. This doesn't make sense. We should have a visual. A call came in from a pilot in a commercial airliner circling above the city. His voice was tense. San Francisco Tower, did you see that? Something just passed underneath us at high speed. Too fast for commercial, too low for military. And then it was gone. The supervisor grabbed the radio. Can you confirm the aircraft type? Silence. Then the pilot responded, his voice barely above a whisper. It didn't look right. It was flickering. Like it wasn't completely there. The control tower fell into stunned silence. Meanwhile, across San Francisco, people turned their eyes skyward. In the heart of the city, pedestrians paused, their gazes drawn to the sky where a massive shadow had passed overhead, silent, unnerving, there for only a fraction of a second before vanishing completely. The streets were momentarily filled with confusion. Some dismissed it as a trick of the light, while others shivered with a sense of unease they couldn't explain. Inside homes and businesses, televisions flickered. Screens glitched, momentarily displaying distorted static before returning to their normal programming. And then the message came. All across the city, radios and emergency broadcast systems activated on their own, their signals hijacked by something unseen. A final transmission crackled through the airwaves, the same voice that had spoken over the control tower. We need assistance. Maid, we are not alone. For a long moment, everything remained eerily still.